Okay, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this Biggerplate webinar. My name is Liam Hughes. I'm going to be your presenter, your host, your compere, your whatever you'd like to call me today. I'm just going to have the video on briefly just to say hello so you can see a real human being actually presenting to you. I'm hoping you can all hear me okay. And more importantly than seeing my camera, I'm hoping you can all see a nice colorful mind map on the screen today. I'm going to be jumping into our presentation in just a minute, but before I do, just a couple of housekeeping notes from me. It's just me presenting today, and I haven't got anybody to help me with managing questions or chat, so please excuse me if you're putting things into the chat that I'm not able to see or respond to. The best way to get a kind of a question specific to the presentation or the topic into my attention is to actually use the Q&A panel. The chat panel tends to move so quickly that you kind of miss things. The Q&A panel tends to be a little bit easier for me to manage when I'm on my own. So please feel free to pop your questions in anytime. It's lovely to see such a wildly international group on the call today. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day. I know everybody's a little bit zoomed out, so it's a real pleasure and to have you with me today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get rid of my camera because I don't think you need to see me that much and it might be a bit distracting. So hopefully you're all seeing a nice colorful mind map on the screen. And just checking in on the chat, make sure there's nothing there. Sounds great. Thank you, Dan, for letting me know. Sounds like we're okay. All right, that's great. So let's jump straight into our presentation today. I'll check back in on the chat every now and then just to make sure sound and everything is all right. Welcome, as I say, from me. I'm actually based here in Austin, Texas at the moment, where I've been sort of living and working for the last couple of weeks. I've got a few more days here before I head over to California for a couple of weeks. So early in the morning here for me. Well, actually not that early, it's about 11. So I know it's much later in the day for some of the people, judging by the time zones you said you're from. So let's jump straight in here and get into our topic. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Liam Hughes. I'm the founder of Biggerplate.com, also known as the world's most productive human, said nobody ever. So the really kind of key thing to say up front is I have not cracked productivity by any stretch of the imagination. What I have found with mind mapping software like MindMeister is it's really helped me to just feel like I'm a little bit more in control, like I'm not quite so overwhelmed with the huge range of things coming at me. So I wouldn't want anybody on the call today to think I've got it all figured out. I am not the world's most productive human by some stretch. I get overwhelmed. I get frozen by the number of tasks to do. What I've just found is what I'm going to try and show you today is mind mapping some of these things out in terms of all the things going on in your world can maybe make you feel at least you know what the chaos is, even if you can't immediately figure it all out. For those of you who are on LinkedIn, please feel free to find me there. That's probably the easiest way to kind of connect with me and find me. That's pretty much the only social network I'm sort of actively using personally. You can find me there, and I'm always sharing lots of things to do with mind mapping and mind mapping tips and techniques. So please feel free to find me there. You can just look for Liam Hughes Biggerplate, and you should find me. So couple of quick abouts for those of you who are not familiar either with biggerplate.com or with MindMeister, which we're going to sort of mainly be talking about today. So biggerplate.com, for those of you who aren't really familiar with us, Biggerplate is a software neutral resource hub, really, and our focus is helping people to go further with mind mapping. We provide a huge range of templates and examples. We have courses, including a course on MindMeister, for example. We host regular webinars, and there's a lot of other resources at Biggerplate to basically just try and help people go further with mind mapping. And that's whether you're brand new to mind mapping or even an experienced user. We've got a huge range of resources to help you just keep moving forward with some support from mind mapping. We're software neutral. We work with all of the world's best mind mapping software, and we've worked with MindMeister for many years, and it's a great company to work with, and we really enjoy doing these kind of joint collaborative webinars with the MindMeister team. So that just gives you a little bit on our position. If you're new to Biggerplate and you want to upgrade to what we call Biggerplate Pro, which is our sort of premium membership, you can actually save 50% on that if you've been joining this webinar. If you use the code Meister22, that'll give you a nice chunky discount on an already pretty affordable Pro membership. That offer ends on the 31st of January, so don't delay too long there. If you're new to MindMeister, which I'm hoping lots of you will be, because it's always exciting when you see new people learning about mind mapping tools. So today, in terms of this webinar, I'm going to assume everybody watching this webinar has no knowledge of MindMeister. I know that's not going to be correct. I can see some names on the call today who I know are real experts in these tools as well. So I'm going to assume zero knowledge, so hopefully really good for anybody who's new or a beginner. I'm going to be showing you some of the core features of MindMeister. We're not going to go into every single click and button and menu. I'm just going to show you what I think are some of the most important things to be aware of. And again, a nice little saving if you are maybe new to MindMeister and thinking you're going to invest in the Pro membership or the Premium membership there. Again, you can save some money on that if you use the code at mindmeister.com. If you use the code Biggerplate, that'll actually save you some money there. So that's it for a sort of a quick about MindMeister and Biggerplate.com. You're obviously going to learn a lot about MindMeister through this session. So about this webinar, the first thing is it's just gone 11 o'clock in the morning here in Austin, Texas. So I got up a few hours ago to an email from our friends at MindMeister who are based in Vienna in Austria. To say that they are having some technical issues today at MindMeister. Now, in all the years I've worked with MindMeister, I can't remember a time when there were technical issues, so the timing of this is quite hilarious to me. But what it does mean is there's a slight risk that something today might happen in MindMeister while I'm presenting and trying to show you things that might not be entirely normal. So I'm going to blame my friends at MindMeister in the nicest possible way. It's supposed to only be affecting the creation of mind maps, but if we go through today and I look panicked or confused, it might just be that as the team in Vienna is resolving the technical issues that have crept up, it might be that something doesn't quite behave as I was expecting. So it means that there's a bit of pressure on today's presentation, and it's a little bit of a tightrope walk, and who knows what could happen, but we'll all get through it together, and that's going to be fun. So the outcomes, what I'm hoping to provide for you today, if you've taken the time out of your busy day to join me, I'm hoping to give you a little bit of basic MindMeister knowledge, see how the software works, see what's possible. And then also, I'd like you to be able to see how you could create what I would call a personal organizer dashboard mind map. And this is where I refer to it as almost a control room for just everything that's going on in your life. And you'll see as I go through this process, hopefully, it's not that you're doing all of the tasks in MindMeister. It's just that MindMeister is your sort of your schematic, your literal map of all the different areas where you may have tasks to do. So the structure of this session, I'm going to tackle it in pretty much 4 sections. We're going to show you this kind of process or this way of thinking that we advocate at Biggerplate, which is capture, categorize, prioritize, and plan. You'll see me or hear me repeating these 4 words repeatedly today. And in each of those 4 sections, I'm going to do a really quick intro to what we're trying to achieve. And then I'm going to just look at some of the core features that are most relevant. And then I'm going to try, remembering our slightly strange situation today, I'm going to try and demonstrate how to do that live and in real time. Now, in an ideal world, maybe some of you might be trying to do the same in MindMeister while I'm speaking. That may or may not be possible depending on the technical issues. So hopefully, at the very least, you can just watch what I'm doing, understand what I'm trying to achieve, albeit I'm going through it quite quickly, and then take it on at your own time. So we're into a new year. We're into a new year, new possibilities, new opportunities, etc. But some of us are probably feeling like it's the same old issues. So what are those issues? Well, the 2 issues that I kind of feel are really challenging to productivity. The first is information overload. This phrase we've all heard, years now. And one of the things I think with information overload is often overlooked is most people focus here. They focus on the amount of information coming at us. They think about emails, phone calls, social media, meetings, etc. But actually, where I tend to get a little bit muddled and stuck myself is actually with all the information and ideas that's already in my head. All the stuff coming at me, I kind of feel like I've kind of come up with my systems for managing that. But where I struggle is where I've kind of got both happening, a lot coming at me and a lot in my head already that I'm trying to figure out. And by and large, my experience over many years now is most of us, myself included, we don't have great coping mechanisms for this. We'll have apps and software promoted to us the whole time that promises to solve some of these issues, but nothing really solves everything. They're really just kind of trying to help us. But our kind of natural coping mechanisms for this are not too great. Very much connected to that, and this is where I think, particularly for those of you on the call today who are professionals, so in business or education where you're working, is context switching. And this is this idea that most of you are probably managing kind of multiple projects, multiple things at any given time, not only just your work, your home, and your studies, but probably multiple projects within each of those categories. And every time we switch between those where our attention is distracted or we're interrupted, it supposedly takes us about 25 minutes to actually resume a task after being interrupted. And a lot of that, in my opinion, is about relocating or locating both information and or ourselves. So once somebody interrupts us, when we're in project A and somebody interrupts us and asks us to come and look at project B, once we're finished talking about project B, we might have to then go back to project A and think, where was I? Where was that piece of information I was just about to put my hands on? Or again, where was I in that project A piece of work? And it takes a little bit of time to just remember, where was I and what was I doing before that interruption? The reality is most of us are getting distracted and interrupted by ourselves, by more interesting things, or by other people throughout the day. So switching constantly between different projects and different domains of work can really mean we're losing a lot of productivity because we're spending a lot of time hunting around, trying to locate information and trying to sort of almost locate ourselves within that particular project or that particular area. So before we go into possible solutions, I'm just going to take a quick check on the chat, make sure there's nothing going here. Right, okay, perfect. So I can't see anything pressing that suggests anything I need to pick up. Okay, so we've hopefully just given you a quick glance at some of the issues I think we're facing. So how do we normally try to tackle sort of task overload, information overload, and just this general sense of I've got a lot to get done in not much time? Well, normally where I see people sort of gravitating towards, and certainly that would be my own sort of default if I probably didn't have mind mapping, is a lot of people go with things like to-do lists, or increasingly over the last few years in particular, things like task management apps and sort of Kanban style task lists and things like that. Now, it's not wrong. I certainly wouldn't be in a position to say it's better or worse, but I do see some problems with to-do lists, if you like, in that sort of linear sense. And I think the same problems apply with the kind of Kanban board style task applications. So one of the biggest issues I see with this is scale. So that means two things. Firstly, the scale of the task lists, they can get really, really big and actually become overwhelming in themselves. So keeping those task lists or those to-do lists manageable can become a sort of almost feel like work in itself. And breaking down that big list into sort of slightly more manageable chunks gets pretty hard the bigger it gets. I think that applies whether you're doing sort of pen and paper to-do lists or even using sort of more task management apps. But I think a more important issue is not only that the lists might get quite big, but it's actually an issue of the scale of the tasks within the list. If I asked you to scribble down a to-do list right now, just on pen and paper, what you probably find yourself scribbling down is a real mix of big, small, and medium-sized things. And when it's just in a linear list type to-do list view, you've got no sense really of the scale of any particular task. And what you actually tend to have is a mix of kind of headlines, where actually, if you paid attention to it, you've kind of got to break that task down into several smaller tasks. So I think a linear or even a kind of task board view of to-do list items means you lose the sense of scale of the tasks you've got to tackle. And that can make it harder to see where to begin, where to focus, where you need to give your attention. Another issue with a sort of linear and task-based approach is the loss of context. So there's a risk that we tick off lots of tasks, but in relative isolation. And if we look at this kind of linear view, we don't really have much of a sense of what else might be connected with any given task. So we're therefore looking at actions in isolation, which means we've lost this bigger picture and we maybe lose the opportunity to see connected tasks or kind of quick wins or ways that ticking off one task might help us tick off another 2 or 3. So the loss of kind of context around any particular task or to-do list item, I think, is a real challenge, and maybe again means we're missing out on opportunities to speed ourselves up and overcome that overload. And then the final issue that certainly I have whenever I run training sessions with a group in person in particular, I'll always ask the room how many of you are sort of to-do list makers, and the hands will always go up. And then my sort of follow-up question for that is, how do you prioritize that list? And usually people have varying degrees of kind of systems or non-systems to sort of try and prioritize things. But again, the challenge I think you would have with a to-do list as such is you're trying to prioritize across multiple domains at any given time. And a single prioritization criteria across all of those things is not necessarily very realistic or reflective of your life. The project that you've got to get done by Friday at work is not more or less important necessarily than picking your child up from school. It's different priorities in different domains and obviously different timing. So I think what we need is a slightly more nuanced approach to prioritization. And we want to be able to prioritize across multiple domains. And we need to be clear in which domains what prioritization sort of criteria are going to apply. So where does all of this lead us? If I'm saying to-do lists are a little bit flawed because of scale, context, and prioritization, naturally, I'm going to be sort of advocating that I think mind mapping can help you solve some of these challenges. So one of the key benefits of mind mapping, which some of you will hopefully be aware of, is we can get both this macro and this micro view. So for example, we're pretty zoomed in right now on what you could consider a micro detail in this mind map. But it's pretty easy for me in MindMeister to just zoom out a little bit, and suddenly you can sort of see in terms of that locating ourselves, where are we in the overall sort of macro scheme of things? And that becomes really, really important in my view when you are trying to manage tasks, to-dos, and information across multiple domains. You don't just have the luxury, most people, of managing one thing all the time. You are almost certainly managing multiple moving parts at any given moment. So one single view that gives us both the big picture and the detail, I think, is invaluable. And you're not going to get that from your sort of to-do list and task list sort of approach. The second thing that I think really helps to overcome some of the issues I talked about earlier is the structure of a mind map. I always like this phrase. I don't know where it's come from, but it's kind of a place for everything and everything in its place. The nature of a mind map means it has this hierarchy, this structure. Everything is topics and subtopics. It's almost like a family tree turned on its side. So this tree structure means everything has to kind of fit with something else, which may sound very restrictive, but actually it's really helpful in terms of getting clarity around what belongs together or even what doesn't belong in the map in the first place. The other thing that the structure of the mind map gives you is that sense of scale that's lost in linear to-do lists. You'll see a little bit later when I show you a sort of personal organizer mind map that you get a sense of scale because little items on the very ends of the branches, that's where our actions might be. Whereas further up the branch structure, sort of closer to in the center of it, that's where our headlines and our domains might be. So the sort of the nature and the position of a particular item within the structure gives us a sense of scale, what size of task that might be, even though there might be hundreds and hundreds of things in the mind map. So the single view, the structure, and then importantly, the flexibility. Within MindMeister, the ability to capture new information, so just add new topics, or maybe bring more information into the map. Very, very simple and easy, just using a couple of keys on the keyboard, also using these pluses in the map, as you'll see in just a moment. So we can capture new information very easily, and we can also contextualize it. And contextualizing it means basically putting it into a position where it's connected to some other things. So if I decide this piece here belongs more relevant down there, suddenly it's taking on a new context based on what it's connected to. And this gives us a huge way of kind of getting a lot more information about something just by what else it's connected to and surrounding it. Whereas again, if you go back to this challenge of the task list and actions in isolation, we lose a lot of context around any piece of information. Importantly, when you're using mind mapping software, and this is a real benefit over using, for example, hand-drawn mind maps, if you're using software like MindMeister, you've got just fantastic ability to adapt to change. So what I'm going to try and show you today and illustrate is not creating a mind map that's a finished product and then guides you around the rest of your life. It doesn't work like that. What we need is something that can live and breathe and evolve with change. Your daily world changes very quickly, so you need something that can adapt equally quickly. And in simple terms, just being able to move information around a mind map is the easiest way to adapt to change, whether it's moving a single topic like that or moving a whole set of topics into a totally new kind of tree structure, because for whatever reason, that better represents what you need. So the ability to adapt the information and your tasks and your ideas using the mind mapping software is really, really very powerful. Importantly, mind mapping software is going to be iterative, or it should be iterative. I'm going to show you each of these steps in turn, but just a quick reminder of these 4 steps that I talked about earlier: capture, categorize, prioritize, and plan. Now, importantly, as you see from our diagram here, it's a continuous cycle. It should never really stop. And what I'm going to show you today is how to sort of build the mind mapping control center that can then just keep evolving and iterating. You don't have to start it again every week or every month. It just becomes a living, breathing document that helps you understand a little bit better all of the different domains and areas that you're trying to stay in control of. So we're going to look at capturing, categorizing, prioritizing, and planning as a way of just taking control a little bit of all the different things we have going on in our world. So that's my very quick run through some of the challenges I think we face and some of the solutions that I think mind mapping provides. So we're now going to work our way around this mind map. You'll notice I'm already doing something that we advocate a lot, which is to work clockwise. So we started up here with welcome, and then we've gone down to the New Year challenges, some of the solutions, and we're going to work our way around clockwise as you look at the mind map all the way around to a sort of conclusion over here at the end. So I'm just going to do a quick questions check. Somebody says, will there be a replay? I'm falling behind taking notes. Yes, Ken, absolutely. You'll be able to get the video after this. Somebody else has asked, will we share the mind map? Yep, you'll be able to get the presentation and you'll be able to get the video after this. So please don't panic. I know I go through this relatively quickly. I mentioned earlier that we have courses on biggerplate.com. You can actually see a version of this presentation in sort of longer form, slower form, a more detailed form for MindMeister on Biggerplate as well. So don't panic about keeping up. As I said earlier, grab a time zone appropriate drink and just relax. So let's have a look then at the first stage in our process. So the capture stage is really about getting information and ideas out of your head. So we can't hold very much. Now, that's not really true. In our brains, we can hold a huge amount. It's really impressive, but there comes a limit. And I don't pretend to know anything about the brain science, but I know when I sort of have my own sense of I can't remember anything else. I can't store anything else in my brain. And that's where this idea of a sort of an external or a second brain comes in. And it's something I think most of us need. It's why sometimes you will feel much better when you've scribbled down a to-do list on pen and paper. It's just because you're externalizing something, you're almost freeing up some storage space in your brain. Now, I know that's a very simplistic view, but it seems to kind of resonate with me. So just have a think, if you like, about what's on your to-do list. If I was asking you to just write down a pen and paper to-do list, what might be on that list for the week or two ahead? So the goal at this stage is to capture. And we're going to capture information using the most basic features of the MindMeister software. So adding and editing topics in a mind map is as simple as using the insert or tab keys on your keyboard to build outwards, as you would say. Or you can use the enter or return keys on your keyboard to enter sort of downwards. Now, that seems like a strange way of sort of describing it, but hopefully you see I can sort of say enter to go down, enter to go down, and maybe insert to go out. And just using the enter or insert keys, things like this, you can just very quickly build out that core kind of tree structure in your mind map. In the new version of MindMeister, which is what you're looking at today, you've also got these little plus symbols that almost make it easier if you prefer to use your mouse to go outwards via there, and then again, just downwards using the pluses. So it doesn't take any real learning or skill to build out the basic structure of a mind map. So you can add and edit information very quickly. A couple of other ways that we can capture more information in a mind map than maybe we might be able to do on our pen and paper to-do list, for example, is we can also leverage features like notes. Notes are a great way in the mind map to capture additional information without cluttering up the surface level of your mind map. What we want to avoid when we're mind mapping is really big blocks of text that are just going to make it hard for us to see the information. So what we want to try and do is stay sort of keyword focused. So our topic says keyword focused, but what we can actually do with this topic and any topic in the mind map is actually add notes to that topic. And you'll see I can just pop open this little panel here in MindMeister and say add lots of extra info without creating visual clutter. So we want to keep the surface level of our mind map nice and clear. But you can see MindMeister gives us this little signal here that says, Liam, you've got a little bit of extra information beneath the surface here. And I can click that and you'll see I've just got that little notes field straight away. Now I use this all the time to kind of copy and paste sections from emails or websites or articles that I'm reading that I want to keep that key information to hand, but I don't want a big chunk of text on my mind map. I want my map surface level to look like this, just a few words at a time. but know and trust that I've got the depth just beneath the surface and really easily available within MindMeister. So adding and editing, just using topics, and then adding extra depth using notes. And then sometimes what we can want to do is actually link or bring other information into our kind of control center. Again, we don't need all the detail right here, but we might just want a little signpost that says, go here for this website that you wanted to save. I'm sure like many of you, I bookmark websites all the time and then forget why I bookmarked it or what it was. If I bookmark things and pull the links into the mind map, I've got, again, the website is in context. So what we can do in MindMeister, again, is add just a link. So if I said I want to add a link into this mind map to biggerplate.com, just try and move my Zoom controls. Here's the Biggerplate website. Maybe I want to actually get a link specifically perhaps to those MindMeister courses. So I'm just going to take that URL. I'm going to come back to here, come into the mind map and say, let's do an attachment. It's not really an attachment, it's just a link I'm going to add. And you see now that MindMeister again gives me a little visual signpost that says, Liam, you've got more information here. Click that link and it's going to take me straight to that destination. Now, if you're doing a lot of different projects and tasks and things in any given time, that idea that I said earlier about taking time to relocate yourself when you've been interrupted, if you can just get into the habit of just saving little bookmarks into the map, little notes, little hyperlinks, little files, attachments. So for example, we can add a PDF attachment right here in the mind map. So when somebody asks me, Liam, have you got that workshop handout for that project coming up? I'm not losing myself hunting around in Google Drive trying to remember what I called it. I'm just hitting this link, opening it up from within the mind map. So this is how we can capture a huge amount in a mind map without going off anywhere else really, and just creating this kind of single source of truth and information that's going to help us. So if we're just kind of demonstrating that as a very simple principle, we might just start with a blank mind map that might just look like this. And what I said earlier is just think about your to-do list. Well, for example, you might just start with that return and enter topics and just say, book Trinidad flights. I'm just kind of thinking what's on my list at the moment. I've got a tech guide. And all I'm doing at the moment is just sort of brainstorming anything that's on my to-do list. I'm not really worrying about mind mapping at the moment. I'm just capturing. Now, at any given time while I'm doing this, I could also be pulling in some of those website links that might be relevant. I might pull in some of those documents that might be relevant. But for the moment, all I'm going to do is just basically put my to-do list into this slightly different sort of spidery appearance. Now, this in and of itself, well, it's not really going to help you solve much. So what we want to do is we've done some capture. We've just put a lot of stuff into the map here. But what we want to start to do now is actually categorize. So that takes us through to a next stage in our mind map. But once we've done our to-do list, it might look like something like this. So this really big list, big spidery stuff, not necessarily a great improvement on your traditional to-do list. So where do we go next? So next, what we're going to do is categorize. We're going to take that big to-do list and we're going to start to break it down into something a little bit more structured. Our brains like categories, and categories make life a little bit easier. If you went into your local grocery store, your supermarket, and tried to navigate your weekly grocery shopping without the aisles and each section of the supermarket being broken down into aisles and subsections, that shopping experience would be pretty frustrating. Categories help us with storage, retrieval, and navigation of information. So if we can categorize our information even a little bit, it's going to help us to make sense of volume, complexity, and importantly, sort of unknowns. We might be able to put something into a category, even if we don't entirely know everything about that item. We can say, I think this belongs with category X. And therefore, again, I can just start to infer a little bit more information than I might if I just treat it in isolation. So if you've built out a little bit of a to-do list, maybe have a think about your categories. So review that to-do list and think, what batches or categories can you see? What belongs together? Now, it could be that you can see some main categories, but what you also want to try to see is some subcategories. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. But we want to always be looking in mind maps, in my view, as kind of categories and subcategories as far as we can go until you arrive at sort of those end points on the branch, which are tending to be your actions and your final kind of pieces of information. So The features in MindMeister that are going to help us with this, pretty simple. It's just moving individual topics around. So we're going to move things into our categories, or we're going to move multiple topics into categories as well. The other thing I'm going to start to use here is where we start to make our information a little bit more visual. So we can add some images into our categorized map to make those main categories stand out. And in MindMeister, you've just got some really nice options to insert images, change the size, and play with the color. And I'll just show you how we can do all of that in just a moment. So remember what we got to before. We started with our big to-do list mind map. So let's go into our big to-do list mind map and just see if we can start to think about how we might make that slightly more structured using some categorization. So all you're going to do here is just look at the items in your to-do list map and think, well, what do they relate to? So credit card bill, that relates to kind of personal, if I say that. So what I'm going to do is just create a personal branch. And I maybe want to make that stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to give it this kind of border color. And what I'm also going to do is add in an image. So within MindMeister, you've got loads of different options here for sort of imagery that you can add into your mind map. So I'm going to add this kind of home image on here. If I want to, I can play around with the size of it. I can make it stand out more. I can play around with the color of it, but I quite like how it's going to sort of match the color of the branch. That makes my life easy there. So now what I want to do is start to put some of these personal items into that personal category. So we had something up here that was the credit card bill. So we're just going to move this down the mind map into that personal area. Now, what else have we got? I can see some other things up here that aren't to do with personal. Foxtrot proposal. That's actually to do with perhaps customers. So I'm going to create a customers branch, and I'm going to start to drag down into here anything that looks like it's to do with customers. Now, remember what I said earlier about categorize and then subcategorize. So within customers, for example, I can see I've got two things here that belong to Alpha Co, which is one of our customers. So let's create a subcategory called Alpha Co. And then I'm starting to move all of those little items into that subcategory of Alpha Co. And once again, I can use the formatting in MindMeister to say I'd like this one to look a little bit different. Let's go back and do that imagery again. Let's put the customers in the kind of halo and just start to build that out. So I'm not going to go through this whole big mind map here in real time because it's not a great use of your time or attention, but you'll see hopefully how just moving things across into their relevant category is going to start to break that big list down into something a little bit more structured. So if we come back to our presentation map, what we can then get to is something that's going to look a little bit like this categorized map, which is this one here. So I've taken that big to-do list and I've now created 4 kind of domains that I think I have to kind of keep track of. I've got a marketing area, I've got customers area, I've got personal, and I've got technical. Now, remember, again, I said categorize and subcategorize. So under the personal branch, I've now got a heading for finance, and there's that task of credit card bill. But as soon as you start to add these subcategories, you'll think of other things that might belong in there. So whereas you originally only had credit card bill, by adding this structure in the mind map, you'll start to just be prompted in your brain about what other finance tasks or items might I have on my list. So you might have things like maybe sell the car as a finance item because you're going to use that cash. So you'll find the structure in the subcategory starts to prompt your brain a little bit about what did I miss first time round when I was capturing that information. Likewise, under customers, you'll see we've now created a branch for each of these customers. And under each customer, we're now starting to think, well, what else did we have going on with that customer that we need to capture and bring in more information? Obviously, a little just demonstration map here, but the categorization and subcategorization turns that really big list into a more organized list, but it also starts to prompt your brain a little bit to think, what else did I not think about first time around? I had little actions to do with webinars, but now I've got a webinar section. What else do I need to do for webinars? Okay, maybe I need to promote the MindMeister webinar, etc. So the structure of the mind map starts to prompt your thinking. And that's where I think you're going to start to get that benefit of, instead of looking at actions in isolation, you're now looking at actions and tasks with a little bit of context around it that's going to prompt you and make you think of things perhaps that you hadn't seen first time around. So we're going to capture and categorize and end up with something that looks a little bit like this. So let's pop back to our presentation mind map. I can see a few questions coming in, but I'm going to probably just get through to a natural pause and then mop them up if I can. So feel free to keep the questions coming. So we've done capture, categorize, and now we need to get onto that prioritization. So remember what we talked about earlier. We need to sort of create priorities that are clear and obvious, but also we need to be realistic about the fact that there are different prioritization criteria being applied in different areas. So to make our priorities stand out, we want to make them visual. We want to be able to see them clearly, and that's going to help us focus faster. If you've got something in the mind map that brings your eye towards it, that maybe is just bringing you towards the things you need to focus on most importantly. What I'd also suggest is to think about mind mapping as a way of prioritizing multiple levels. So you can prioritize the whole, but you can also prioritize within almost every section, which I'll try and demonstrate quite quickly in just a minute. The features we can use here, well, one is not so much a feature of MindMeister, it's more just a thing to challenge yourself on, is what we call top 3 thinking. And this is a good way of breaking down big lists of things and ensuring a process of sort of continuous prioritization. So let's think about something like our customers branch. We might have 6 customers. And what I'm going to actually do in the mind map is create a top 3 and others pile, and then have my customers, Alpha, Romeo, Echo, all in here. Now, the important thing here is we're not saying the others don't matter, but we're saying at any given time, you want to give yourself a really clear kind of guidance to say, for whatever reason, Zulu is now a really important customer. And maybe Alpha for now just moves back down into the others pile. It's not quite so relevant right now for whatever reason. Maybe there's nothing pressing. So this process of continuously moving items up or down in the priorities, it may sound like it's going to be a lot of kind of fiddly work for no gain, but it means if you ignore this customer's branch for a couple of days and then you have to come into it, you're giving yourself really clear visual guidance about where your focus should be, because you've organized things into this top 3 area. If you're using that kind of technique, you can also then start to leverage things like the icons in MindMeister. Now, we used images earlier to make some of our items stand out visually, but you can also use these icons to make certain information sort of clearer in terms of what matters. So those priority icons are things that might help to mark something up as priority 1 or priority 2, priority 3. You might have a single icon that suggests something is perhaps super urgent, a little stopwatch, or something as a top 3. So we can use the icons in MindMeister to really kind of reinforce visually the urgency or the importance of particular items. So if we go back to our mind map where we got up to, let's just imagine, for example, we want to apply some of those principles into our mind map. So let's think about those icons first and foremost. So maybe in the marketing section, maybe our business is really focused on content as our kind of primary sort of marketing driver. So I'm going to move, sorry, I've got Zoom controls getting in my way here, which is not helping. I'm going to move community down. That'll make my life easier there. So let's say this is a good prioritization of our marketing tactics. Content is first, community is second, and social is third. Now, I would always suggest using the structure of the map itself to help you with your priorities. So here it does follow top to bottom the order of priorities, but I can also add those icons in, just like I said earlier, and just say, just for absolute clarity, these are how we view our marketing priorities this quarter, for example. Now, it might change. You might change those icons, but it means when I come into my marketing area, I know exactly where I should be spending most of my time. And again, even within this section, we could use the same techniques. We could mark everything up. We could say webinars is 1, video is 2, blogs is 3. Now, you might think this is starting to get a little bit overkill, and it's always about just finding a balance of what's practical. If you have to keep marking everything up all the time, that might get a little bit annoying. For me and my team at Biggerplate, we generally know that the structure of the mind map is giving us signals about priorities in terms of top to bottom, but you can use these icons to really make some of that information stand out. Other things we might do, remember what I suggested earlier about applying this top 3 thinking. So we could do this just here and say, right, let's start to think a little bit more proactively about which customers are most important right now. So maybe I've got some projects in motion with Bravo Co. So they are in the top 3. Zuko, nothing happening right now. Likewise, perhaps with Foxtrot. So we just start to, again, where we've got a big list of 6 or 7 customers, we're now just starting to break this down into slightly more manageable chunks. That mean we come into the customers section of our map and we're focusing in on the customers for whatever reason that matter the most right now. Again, using MindMeister, we might decide we want to mark that top 3 with that little star icon to just make it sort of visually stand out. So this is where I'm talking about prioritizing both across the entire mind map at this kind of high level. For example, you might say marketing is our top priority. So we might even mark that with the priority 1 icon. And you might mark customers at number 2. Obviously, you're then sort of substituting that nice image. So you may not want to do that. But within every level of the mind map, you can be prioritizing ever more tightly. So within Bravo Co, you can say training is our top priority, advertising is our second, and third is integration. And within every single section of the mind map, you can be giving yourself little prioritization signals using the features of MindMeister. So hopefully that's giving you a sense of how we've gone from a really big to-do list into a more categorized and structured view of all the things happening on in our working world and our personal, etc. And then we've also started to prioritize and make certain things stand out a little bit more. So we've gone through capture, categorize, prioritize, and then finally comes the plan section. And this is where really what I'm trying to encourage you to do is avoid jumping straight into actions, but just take a little bit of time to do some planning. The famous quote is, plans are useless, but planning is invaluable. So the little bit of time you spend planning out or thinking through the tasks, the priorities, etc., the better and more focused your tasks are likely to be. Remember, what we're looking for is something adaptable, a mind map dashboard that's going to adapt to change, accommodate new information, and avoid us starting over. We don't want to rebuild this mind map every week. What we want to do is have a control center where new information comes in and we figure out where it fits, we adapt our plans, adapt our information, and just keep going. What we're also looking for in the mind map is an easier way to monitor and review where we're up to across multiple domains. And this is where I think dividing your view or your attention across lots of different software programs is just really unhelpful. What you really want is that single view that can give you glance access. So at a glance, I can see any kind of red flag issues. I can see problem areas, and I've got information signposts to help me figure out where I should be focusing. So similar sort of feature set that we might use here, task completion icons in MindMeister. So for any particular task in the mind map, we can just add a little sort of getting started icon, and then perhaps I've done part of it, and then I've done half of it, then I've done 3/4 of it, and hey presto, it's complete. And simple little markers like that could just help us keep track of our progress, again, across those multiple domains that we're working with. So if we come back to our demonstration mind map, and let's maybe come down into maybe an area down here where we've got some work to do. Maybe we've got Bravo Co. We've got a training project. So we've got some planning tasks and we've got some admin tasks. So here's where we've gone through all of the features. We've used our prioritization. We've used our top 3 thinking. You'll see here, we've got a workshop plan attached. And that means I just go straight to the document that I need to work on. I'm not building the workshop plan here in my dashboard in MindMeister. The workshop plan is maybe a Word document or PowerPoint slides. But the key thing is here, what I'm going to do is give myself a little signal of how far through am I with that workshop planning. Similarly with designing a handout, how far complete have I got with that? Likewise down here with sending invoices, you see we've now broken down this original idea, this was maybe on our to-do list. We've broken this down, we've categorized and subcategorized right down to now task level on the ends of our branches. And this is that issue I was saying to you earlier about just making sure we're not going straight to tasks and actions, because actually before we can send any invoices, which may have been the task on our to-do list, before we can do that, we need to do this. We need to get the PO number so we can actually make that invoice accurate and actually get paid. So as soon as we're out here, we start to get into the tasks and the actions. And this is really where you start to plan and execute and monitor your progress across multiple items. So when I'm working up here, perhaps in the webinars section, maybe I'm working away on the Helen Jones webinar, I start to think about, right, what are the actions? I need to send Helen speaker info. I need to retrieve perhaps a speaker bio. Maybe I need to set up Zoom, etc. So what originally my to-do list just said, I think back here, it said sort of Helen Jones webinar, Helen webinar, there it is. I now have got into a structure that makes me break it down, and I'm now ready to do the planning around the actual task. And then I can use these little icons to keep myself at this high level on track. Now, remember what I said, the action of sending Helen the speaker information doesn't happen in MindMeister. It's going to be an email perhaps, but I can just keep track of where I am with it using the MindMeister icons to say, I've done that. I'm now waiting on that. Now, somebody calls me up and says, Liam, where are we with that Bravo Co training project? Okay, all I need to do now is just zoom out a little bit. I know that Bravo Co is to do with my customers. I know that Bravo Co is in the top 3. I open up what I need and I'm able to say to someone, okay, the workshop plan is half completed. I'll get right on it. That interruption, they want the document. I've got the handout right here in the mind map. So I give that to them straight away. I don't go lose time hunting around. So I'm locating the key information I need. I get rid of that person who's bothering me about Bravo Co. And I come back up here. Where was I? Okay, I was in content. I was in webinars, my number 1 area of focus, and I was on the Helen Jones task, and I was still needed to wait here. So the ease with which I can kind of switch between these domains and these projects, I find much, much easier in mind mapping to just have in this kind of control room rather than spread across several different tasks, applications, or documents. So that's my whistle-stop tour of creating a personal productivity sort of dashboard with MindMeister. The important thing to just remind you is this then repeats, so the capture, categorize, prioritize, plan. The dashboard is ever evolving. You don't start from scratch again. So you shouldn't really have to go back to this stage where you've got just a big list. You're really only ever going to be tweaking this view where you've got your categories and your subcategories. And it might be after a while that maybe your job description changes or maybe your job as a whole changes and you want to add in a whole new branch, a whole new area of your mind map, perhaps called studies, and maybe you've got assignments or different topics. The map is going to accommodate that. You're not going to have to throw everything out and start again. So that adapting and just evolving nature of the dashboard is really going to help you. Remember that ongoing process. When something comes in, capture it. So let's say a new idea or a new piece of information comes in. Somebody says, that company, Liam, that we work with, that project is now live. So what am I going to do? I'm first of all going to capture that piece of information. I'm going to bring it into my dashboard. And then what I'm going to do is categorize it. And really what I'm saying is, where does this fit amongst all of the other stuff that I've got to stay in control of? Once I understand where it fits, I then need to understand, does it matter? How important is it? Or is it just that I need to store it, capture it, and save it for later? So I'm going to bring it into the map, figure out where it fits in that dashboard, give it some signal of importance, either by how it's positioned or how it's marked in the map. And then if I need to, I'm going to build out that action plan, those little tasks that help me keep track of that new piece of information. I absorb it into my existing workload, and then I figure out what I need to do with it, if anything. And sometimes all you need to do is save key information into your mind map as a little bit of a reference point. So think about this ever-evolving, repeating cycled process of capture, categorize, prioritize, and plan. And if you're using MindMeister, you're going to find it so much easier to pull that information in, figure out where it fits in relation to everything else, and then start to figure out what you need to do about it. And by doing that, you're giving every little action and task much greater context. You're seeing where does it fit in this big picture, and not just responding to whichever task shouts the loudest or comes in new. You're looking really at where did all these different things fit together in this grand scheme of things. So I'm going to just wrap up and come to the questions panel. A couple of questions I sort of tend to get when I talk about things like this is, how long does it take me to create this dashboard? If I sit down, how long am I going to spend to create what you've just created, Liam? Well, the simple answer is kind of the version 1 with just some categories and stuff. That's about half an hour's worth of work, possibly even faster if you're using MindMeister. So it's not a big deal, and it doesn't have to be fully comprehensive. Remember, it's an evolving document. So just get started. The sort of get started is the key focus here. And then it's going to evolve. You might decide that actually your category headings are not quite right. So just edit them, change them, restructure the map and refine it until it starts to become an accurate reflection of your daily life. So people will also ask, how often do you review and check it? Well, for me, this kind of mind map is always open. It's my reference point. When something new comes in, I'm bringing it into the mind map to seeing where it fits. But I certainly would recommend checking in on it daily. Otherwise, it's going to get out of date pretty quickly. Now, that might sound like adding extra work, but I would really encourage you to think of it as sharpening the sort of tools, sharpening your mind around which tasks to be focused on. And speaking of tasks, one of the questions I'll always get asked if I'm using MindMeister is whether I'm using this with Meister Task, which is the task-based tool from the same company. And the answer is not for my personal productivity, to be honest. I just don't find I need it because all of the tasks in my personal dashboard are mine. So I don't need to kind of move them around somewhere else. So I don't want to divide my view. I like to keep that whole view of everything that's going on. It doesn't feel necessary to me. But yet in team situations, we're using Meister Task as a way of sort of moving tasks out of the mind map into something that's maybe a little bit different view of that. So finally, just remember these couple of offers you've got on the table. If you've joined this webinar, you've got 2 great offers there that I'm going to leave on the screen. You can save 10% on MindMeister if you use the code Biggerplate on mindmeister.com, and you can save 50% on Biggerplate Pro membership if you use the code Meister22 before January 31st. So I'd strongly advocate giving MindMeister a try if you haven't already. It's great software. It's going through a big change at the moment. It's very exciting, improving all the time. And if you want to go further with MindMeister, then I would obviously be slightly biased in recommending Biggerplate Pro membership as the means to do that. So I'm going to pause at that point for breath and hopefully just come and find any questions that I can answer. Thank you all very much for your questions and comments. I'm going to try and answer some of these questions if I can. Eduardo asked, can we add check marks? Yeah, Eduardo, I think I probably covered that just with that little sort of icons feature that I showed you. You hopefully can see on the screen here. You've got lots of different icons that you can add. Some are just sort of for visual effects, but I use some of these for sort of tracking myself. So I tend to go to this little rocket ship down here, or should move, that gives me these kind of check marks. And that's what I said earlier was I kind of tend to move them through the process and then it just becomes this, I've completed that. Nikhil has asked a really great question here, which is, can you connect separate mind maps together into a master map and click the master map to take you to a submap? It's a great question, Nikhil. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name badly. Yes, you can and you should. So what the question is could you use one sort of master map and then give yourself signposts to other maps? Well, yes, and that's exactly what we've done today, actually. So this very colorful map is our master map, if you like. And then at different points, what I've done is create little links off to other maps. Now, because MindMeister's not, what I've done here is I'm just jumping off, click that link, and I'm going to another map. Now, because this is just a presentation, all I'm doing is taking you off to another part of the presentation. But what I'm doing in my daily life is these links to other maps might be, for example, project maps. So in that example where we had lots of clients and lots of projects, quite often the client, there'll be a link into maybe a project map. And that's when I take myself off somewhere else. You don't necessarily want to be building in your personal organizer. For example, if I'm down here in, let's say, client, the Bravo client that we used earlier, maybe the training plan or some big project, I don't want all of that plan in this mind map. That's going to start to get really impractical. But for example, I might just link over here to another MindMeister map, which is where I'm doing my workshop planning. So absolutely, Nikhil, yes, you connect maps together, and it's a really good idea to do that to avoid your kind of dashboard becoming a bit overwhelming. Eduardo has a good question here. I'm trying to get through as many of these as I can. Can I import my own icons? Kind of, yes. People use the word icon in different ways, so I'm going to sort of be cautious in asking, but yes, so adding own images. So for example, maybe I've got a diagram or a visual that I want to bring into my mind map. What I can do is come into the tool here, and you see add. I've got connections, comments, notes, assign, attachments, media. That's where I would go to be adding images. So for example, if I wanted to add the sort of little Biggerplate symbol, I can add that into the mind map like that. Now that's pretty big. So MindMeister gives you great options to just resize that image, nice and easy. And hey presto, you've added your own icon straight into the map. Really great options you've now got in MindMeister, which is relatively new, is the ability also to play around with the location of that image once you've added it in. So you've got really nice options now in MindMeister to bring in your own icons, bring in your own images, and do what you need there. Michael Ware, yeah, great question, Michael. Michael says the icons on his MindMeister are different from yours, and it doesn't have the same toolbars. It would probably suggest, Michael, that you're using, you've perhaps been using MindMeister for a little while, and you might be looking at the older editor. What you're looking at on the screen today is the sort of newer version of MindMeister, which all new users of MindMeister will be seeing this. If you're seeing different menus in MindMeister to what I've got in front of me here, you probably therefore just need to look for somewhere on your screen. It will say kind of open in new editor, and that's all you need to hit. And then you're going to get these, I think, much more modern icons, much more modern menus. The new style of MindMeister is much better, I think, much brighter, more visually engaging. So Michael, if you're seeing a sort of different set of menus on the screen, it probably suggests you're still looking at sort of the older version of MindMeister, which is really fantastic. You can do everything I've just shown you using the old version. But if you're a subscriber to MindMeister, you should just be getting the new version automatically. I don't believe you should need to be paying upgrades or anything like that. So just have a look around on your screen, Michael, for something that says open in new editor. But if you get stuck with that, maybe contact the team at MindMeister and they can probably help you with that. Adam, a great question, Adam. How do you handle maps that contain very large amounts of information? It's actually very related to that earlier question, Adam, about sort of creating other maps and linking them together. So, for example, if I just go to my personal organizer example over here, like I say, if I started to do my workshop planning over here and I start to do lots of information, lots of topics, info, and I'm adding maybe notes, attachments, hyperlinks. So perhaps this workshop planning branch in and of itself in the mind map just starts to become really huge, and actually is going to start to become slightly problematic, because even with the ability to zoom in or out, this is going to start to get a bit overwhelming to have a kind of one tiny branch of this very big picture. So that's where I would very strongly advocate sort of taking all of that topic and breaking it out into a separate mind map and then linking them together, just like Nikhil's question earlier. So taking all of that planning mind map, putting it into a separate planning map, and then just using this attachments thing to link them together. In my experience of MindMeister, you're not going to have an issue handling large amounts of information. It's a very robust bit of software. So even with maps full of links and attachments and topics, you're not going to sort of find that it's slowing down, or certainly not in my experience of it at all. So the software can manage really, really big maps and lots of information. And that's kind of what it's there for now. So I hope that kind of answers that. Robert has a nice question that I get asked a lot about what do I do once something's completed? So let's come back here to our map. Maybe we've got a task that says action to be completed. And then, well, it's done. So I've ticked it off. So what happens next? Does that just sit in my personal organizer, my map, taking up space? And of course, the more actions you complete, the more that is going to become a pretty big and slightly annoying kind of thing. So my personal view, Robert, is I delete them after a week or so. Unless I need to store it for some reason, I delete them. I've worked with clients where they have to keep their kind of completed tasks as a record for compliance. So in that regard, what I would almost be saying is just create rather an area, if you really need to, just to drop all of your completed tasks in the mind map. And that way you can kind of just get them out of the way. You can just drop them into the completed area, close that down, and it's not in the way, but you've still got the record if you need to. Now, if that starts to get really, really big and complicated, again, I would almost suggest creating a separate map that's just your kind of tasks done map, so you've got that record. But my personal world, I'm not usually required to keep a particularly lengthy record of the tasks I've completed. I know some people feel a little bit more personally like they like to see that they've completed some tasks. I've just had to learn to sort of get over myself on that one a little bit. So hopefully that gives you a perspective there. Thank you all for the great questions. I'm trying to kind of just pick up the ones that I think are most appropriate for everybody. There's a few that are quite specific that I'm probably just going to skip. There's a question here that Ken is an interesting one. Is there a way to identify a task that must be done before another one? So a little bit earlier, I showed you, Ken, if I've understood your question correctly, what did we have? We had in here that idea that we couldn't send an invoice until we got our PO number. So there's no way in MindMeister to set up sort of almost a dependency, if that kind of gets to your question, Ken. So for example, not being able to tick this one along until I've ticked this one along. There's no way to do that to my knowledge, at least. But what I might do sometimes, if I want to make it really clear that there is some link or dependency, is use this connection feature to make something really, really clear and say, draw a line from this topic to this topic, maybe make it stand out a little bit more. So add these kind of little visual signals to myself that says, the reason you want to prioritize this task is because you can't do this task until that's done. So I will use this for that kind of purpose, and you've got sort of lots of options in there to sort of format how that looks and what that looks like, and then something goes wrong. We got through nearly the whole thing without something going wrong, so that was pretty good. But hopefully, Ken, before I broke MindMeister, I sort of vaguely answered your question. There's not a sort of structural way to put in dependencies, but there are kind of these little visual signals that you could give yourself to help. We're bumping up just about my time here. So Michael has a question. I don't see a way to create a big thumbs up on the welcome node. Something like this. Oh, okay, that's back to the question about menus. So Michael, I hope I've answered your menus question, but let me know. Please feel free, by the way, if anybody wants to follow up with me, my email address is liam@biggerplate.com. We do loads of webinars, public, we do private training webinars, all these kinds of things. So if I haven't been able to answer your question, or I didn't even see your question, I've got quite a lot coming at me here. So I'm trying to just scan them quickly. But if you have any follow-up questions, or you want to know more about Biggerplate and kind of our relationship with MindMeister and how we kind of collaborate over many, many years now, please do feel free to email me directly. As I said earlier, do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And somebody here says, is this the beta MindMeister? No, this is the new-ish MindMeister. It's new, sort of about 3 months old. It's yeah, very, very strong, big improvement on the previous version. So if you're not seeing this version of MindMeister looking the same as mine on screen, just have a look for that open in new editor feature, the button that somewhere will be in MindMeister. So take a look for that. That pretty much brings me up to time. I'm hoping there's a few questions in the questions panel that I think a little bit more questions to direct to the MindMeister team. So things like upgrading my account or the limits to my MindMeister personal account. If you have questions about the MindMeister accounts, whether you can access certain features or these kind of things, that's definitely something to direct to the team at MindMeister, and they'll certainly help you there. Biggerplate doesn't make or sell any software. We like to stay well clear of that. So anything about upgrading your MindMeister account, or which kind of account you might need to achieve what you need, do send that over to the team at MindMeister. They're a great team, and they'll be on hand to help you. And I think, looking at the questions, I've managed to capture and cover a fair few of those. Thank you all for the questions. But I think that's pretty much my time up, and I greatly appreciate you giving your time up already for this session. So I'm not going to take up any more of your precious time, because you need to go and be productive people, as the name of this webinar suggests. So thank you all very, very much for joining me. Please don't forget to contact me if you have any follow-up questions. liam@biggerplate.com. You can reach me there, and I will do my best to either answer your question myself or direct you to relevant resources or people to help. But in the meantime, thank you all one more time for joining me today. Have a very productive remainder of your day, your evening, your afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you on future webinars where we'll be looking at other topics around making the most out of MindMeister and mind mapping. Thanks for joining me.